went to the University of Michigan in the fall of 1945. This one is where I heard the Messiah for my first time. My memory is sitting in the very back row of hill, which wasn't quite like this, and hearing the Messiah for the first time. And I didn't know, everybody, the Hallelujah chorus comes and everybody stood up, and I couldn't figure out if they were planning to leave or just what. And then they sing this Hallelujah chorus, and I couldn't believe it. The tears started rolling down my eyes without me planning on it, So every time I hear the Hallelujah chorus, I think of Hill Auditorium and being in the very back row. Early on in that year, I became connected with a group called the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and I became Trudy's roommate for that year. I've known Trudy since my freshman year in college. She married John Bollier, who happened to be my husband's seminary roommate. We stayed in touch all those years, through babies, through marriage, through death. We stay in touch, and when we get back together, it's like we pick up right where we left off.
I did study a lot, but I went to bed earlier. That was all. That was all. We had a good time together in that we had common kind of understanding.
InterVarsity was a movement that came from England, and it was an attempt in England to bring a academic approach and a faithful approach and I wouldn't say reformed approach, but it had a theology that was grounded in the Reformed faith, though it did not come from Presbyterians or the Reformed Church. So InterVarsity provided a place for people to ask questions, and it was all right to not know all the answers. It was all right to have tension between faith and understanding, and that it was all right to have mystery. So this was I would say, Bible study oriented group of people that were searching to know more about the Christian faith. The whole message throughout the Bible of God was interested in the widow and the alien and the poor, and that how you showed God's love was to be of service in the world. And this Christian worldview related to all of life, that not just your little religious category, but how you lived in your work and how you treated your children and your spouse and your friends. So it affected every part of your life. And Dr. Vergene was a master at, and I really thought this was amazing to have this kind of view of the world. And as I'm saying this and thinking about it now, that was probably one of the greatest things I got from attending the University of Michigan, and because it's influenced all of my life. Bob was in InterVarsity. I was sent by InterVarsity to a conference in Toronto, and I go there and you're from Michigan, and so there was a Bob Wyman. Had I met Bob Wyman? No, I didn't know anything about Bob Wyman. But after this conference, I went back thinking I have to find out who this person was. He had come back he was a chemical engineer. He had come back to get a doctorate, and he was there and decided he would only stay a year and get a master's degree. And I finally started looking for this person, and he came, but he was very bashful, didn't say much, would come to meetings, but I got to know him then. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to go to Africa. I was going to save Africa, you know. My ambitions weren't little, but that was not going to work out. So I guess maybe this was my junior year in college. I decided then I would major in history because I loved history, and I would get a teaching certificate. It was hard to get a job because all the teaching jobs first went to the soldiers that graduated. So I could not get a job anyplace in Michigan. Dr. Vergene asked me about this, and he said there was a church in upstate New York, not a church, but a school looking for a teacher. The Christian School of East Palmyra, New York. It was a little square building. It was one floor for kindergarten through 5th grade, and then I was in the basement, and I became the principal of the school primarily because I was teaching the older grades. And I taught there for 2 years. He did not preach for an hour, but he was very much of a scholar, and he got his master's in theology in Hebrew, and so he would always study the original text. When it was in the New Testament, he studied the Greek.
Wonderful.
And the Old Testament before he would preach on that. He was very methodical. Every sermon he would put in a little envelope, and he had a lay reader, and the letter he'd written to the lay reader, and the hymns he had, and put it in a little envelope. And then when he retired, they were all in right order, all of the Genesis. And
Oh, wow.
Well, and you are such an intentional listener, both to sermons and also to the experience of worship. In hindsight now, it's because now we know we have so many conversations at the church door where you're spot on responding to something I said in a sermon, or commenting on one of the threads of worship that went through not only the sermon, but the selection of the hymns and the anthems. So you have an uncommon gift for being a listener and an observer and a participant of worship.
Bob was called January of 1955. We moved there. Larry was not quite 2, and Beth and Alan were born March 10th, and they came a month early. And we stayed in Rahway for 10 years. In Rahway, our next door neighbors were Rita and Dick Kravitsky, and they moved in about the same time we did. They had a daughter, Anne, who was Beth's age.
Is that you?
Yes, I'm Vergene.
Oh, gee. You look good.
Did you make these cabinets that are holding these cabinets?
This is
Yes, that
And-
one
and
there,
fountain
there.
pen.
I made that one, and I made this one right here.
And there was a woman, oh, this woman saved my life. Her name was Mrs. Boswell, and she lived a block
Okay.
over. And the day we moved, Mrs. Boswell came to our house, and do you remember those kind of shoes that women wore? They tied, and they had, if you look in old pictures, you'll see them, and they wore these heels. You remember those. She had those heels. And I remember her looking somewhat like a witch with a pointed nose. And she walks into my house and steps over the rug and says, "My name is C. Boswell, and I live blocks down, and whatever you need me, I'm here." He had to be taken to a doctor 3 times a week. So
gee.
C would come over, pick us up, and we would load all the kids in the car and drive over to the doctor in Westfield. We lived to Levittown, New York in 1965. And we lived there until Bob retired in 1991. So we were there for the 26, whatever many years that is. In 1976, I attended a national women's meeting. And at that time, we're sort of 10 years behind everybody else in the church, but they were forming consciousness-raising groups. So I came back with a yellow sheet of paper that had all the rules, and we started a consciousness-raising group. And from the beginning of that group evolved this circle. The churches then had small groups so people could get to know each other in these big churches. And we started a circle that had, the youngest person would be in her 20s, and then we had someone in every decade. And that was the beginnings of a circle that lasted through the 10 years that we were there and is continuing today.
Circle was a place where I could just be who I was. Scared at times, very confident at times, and proven wrong many, many times. And I think having the intergenerational nature of Circle, having people, when I was in my 20s, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and then that continued to happen. And so I felt as comfortable with people in their 80s because it was this kindred spirit. And the idea of being whole people and not having the societal limitations. So thank you, everybody. You made me who I am today, like it or not.
While we lived in Levittown, I went back to college, got my master's degree in education, and then got a job in the Wantagh school system, teaching kindergarten. This was my kindergarten class. This was my room for kindergarten. Now, we're not supposed to be here, but come on in. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Now my kindergarten was a playtime, socialization. We had some of this. So I'm sure this is kindergarten, but look at this. A kid who has that. There is so much stimulation in this kid. Look at how do you get a kid to focus? I should go and say we're here before we're arrested. So we moved here in 1991, and partially we moved here because David Prince was the minister of the Ewing Church. I joined the church. It was the most friendly church I ever joined. Bob doesn't join a church, he becomes a parish associate, it's called. So he becomes a parish associate. And I started a women's group somewhat to be like the one in Levittown. And nobody knew us. But the very first Sunday we were there, someone invited us to go to coffee hour, took us across the street, introduced us to people, and I was invited to join the choir. Now, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing. But David was a master at making that a friendly church.
Right.
And you were part of that.
And he worked very hard at
Yes.
that. Who had been there for 17 or 18 years, I think, when he was leaving, and it was his last Sunday. And either he didn't want something said, or Elizabeth didn't want anything said. But it was his last Sunday, and we had a meeting after church, a congregational meeting. And we did the meeting part, And then you get right up there, and she said, well, this is Thomas Emmerich's last Sunday, and I think it's awful that nobody has said anything yet.
I forgot that, but it was awful.
I actually have something that
Okay.
I would like to play.
Oh, go tell me.
Yes, you know what it is.
Oh,
So we're
it's
going to do
called
that.
Rosamitra. It's so beautiful.
Well, it's been a treasured friendship over the years, you know, for all that life deals, you know. I've always felt very supported, you know, by Vergene and Bob.
He taught me how to love. He taught me how to be loved, and he loved me. He taught me, he taught me much, much more about my Christian faith. He taught me what it meant to live a life of service. He taught me how important family was. He came from a very loving family himself. I had to teach him that his job could not be the most important thing. I think we learned how to grow together. I'll be eternally grateful. I'm reminded again, I have 5 wonderful children, and they're very different, but I am so proud of all of them. Not in a, oh, look what I did, look what I've done sort of way, but all of them have done well in what they were called to do. I feel all of them have served this world in a very, very wonderful way, that they've left their mark, and the world is better for having them. And I could not ask for more than that to be my legacy. I'm sure you've gotten through all this that's religious kind of person, because my faith has been so much a part of my life. I cannot be separated from it. But you also need to know I failed. Every single night I have to ask for forgiveness. But every single night I go through, this is my prayer. God be merciful to Larry. God be merciful to Leaf. And I go through my family and ask that God's mercy be on them. What more could I ask of God than God give his mercy? I don't know what else to say. Thank you. You have been magnificent.
Angels we have heard, sweet